The mountains and forests of Japan are home to legends and lore, and gods and demons. They are spiritual places, and there is a great deal of respect from the natives given to the spirits of the wilderness. Ghosts, yokai, humanoid creatures akin to fae and cryptids make the forests and mountains their homes, as well as the animals and humans. Today I'm joined by Horror Over Coffee, so be sure to check his channel out and subscribe. Now, let us take our first steps into the wilderness. This happened when I was at university. I had a part-time job in a bar, and I heard this story from a regular customer. He was in his late 20s, I'd say. He was an office worker. He's from Ibaraki, and so am I. So we naturally had a few mutual topics of conversation to share. There's places in Ibaraki which are famous for fireflies. And we spoke about other things like places of interests and things from our rural hometowns. It was nice. One night after all the customers had left, he was sat at the bar, and we were talking while I was washing some stuff up. He looked at me and started a conversation. "Hey, you can laugh if you want, but..." He started speaking to me and the bar owner in a very matter-of-fact manner after that. He had a story he wanted to share with us. He said he returned to his hometown to visit his parents during the summer holidays. He said that he wanted to see the fireflies that I said our hometowns were famous for, so he went on a solo drive to find a good viewing spot. But even though we are both from Ibaraki, his hometown was a good distance away from mine. He called a friend of his and asked for a good spot to go to see the fireflies. His friend knew of some farmland which was at the foot of a mountain about a 30-minute drive from his place. The houses in that area are few and far between, and if the moon hadn't been full and bright that night, then it would have been pitch black out. There was additional light provided by the hordes of fireflies. He parked his car along a mountain road as far away as he could from any neighboring houses, so he wouldn't be spotted and told to move on. He watched the fireflies while drinking some beer he brought from home. He was loving it. He described the fireflies as elegant. He was really at peace with himself. In order to sober up, he took a nap in his car, and he planned that when he woke up he would head back home. When he did eventually wake up, he had the urge to pee. He didn't know what time it was, he just got up and stepped out of the car. After I got out of the car, I wanted to take one final look at the fireflies, and that's when I saw something. On the left side of the road there were rice fields, and on the right, you can see a thicket of trees which surrounds the base of the mountain above them. There was a path leading to the mountains quite close to where he left his car. The path was more like a tunnel as the trees seemed to create a natural roof. They encircled the path. He took a look down this path and he saw something move from deep within the shadowy trees. Even though the moon was full and the moonlight was abundant, the thickets of trees were shadowy. His eyes had grown accustomed to the dark, and he was struck with a primal fear of being alone in the woods in the dead of night. Yet he couldn't look away. He kept his eyes on the dark part of the tunnel where he thought he saw something move, and then he saw it again. There was definitely something moving in there. A chill ran through my body. I've never felt anything like that before. It was just pure fear. My body broke out in goose flesh. I was thinking, oh God, this is terrible. I gotta get out of here. But I couldn't move. My curiosity kept me welded to the spot I stood in. The shape in the shadows moved closer and closer into view. And I finally saw it. It was a man. Well, like a man. It was covered in some kind of old ragged cloth. It swayed and it slowly approached. Something just kicked in and then I was able to move. He said his legs were heavy and it felt like he was walking through water, but he was making progress. He walked when he wanted to run though. He was looking over his shoulder. He didn't want to see what was heading his way, but he didn't want to look away either. His eyes were fixed on the shadowy path that leads to the mountain. It was at this point he saw the thing clearly. It was wearing tattered and torn rags. The clothing looked like it was from a different time period. It was like the clothes worn by some nobility from the Heian period. It's Jay here, sorry to jump in, but he was describing kariginu, a form of hunting robe from Japanese history. Here's an example, but just try to imagine it tattered and torn. Back to the story. I saw that over its face it wore a mask, but the mask had no features. I'm sure it was a mask. It didn't even have holes where the eyes should be. The mask was bound to its face by some kind of thick rope. It didn't look instantly recognizable as a human. A featureless white mask humanoid had just emerged from the darkness of the mountainous woods. As he was watching things unfurl before him, the thing turned with nightmare precision to face him, and then began to advance towards him. It moved from side to side, left foot to right foot. It swayed and shook erratically as it moved. By the time he got back to his car, he said that the thing was so close it could have caught him if it chose to run. Luckily, he had left his car running while he slept. I threw my car in reverse. I was so determined to get away, and in such a panic, I didn't even notice that I could have collided with a tree. I wasn't scared of getting into an accident. Nothing was more important to me than getting away from that thing, so I sped down the mountain passes to get back to light and back to the roads that took me home. While I was driving, I heard myself repeating, "No, no, no, no." I don't know how long I had been doing that for. Well, neither myself nor the bar owner laughed at his story. We could see that even remembering it for him was frightening enough. I thought about what he was describing, and to me, I don't think he saw a ghost. The way he described that thing in the woods reminded me of the Nopperebo. Hi, Jay again, sorry. The Nopperebo is a faceless apparition. It's classed as a yokai. It lacks eyes, nose, mouth, any features that you would normally find on your own face. It has smooth skin. Nopperebo appear traditionally in rural settings. The primary purpose of them revealing themselves to humans is not really understood, but some believe that they feed on the fear of mortals. Here's a photo of one. Back to the story. He said that he gets frightened and agitated by dark places, and he hates being the last one at the office when he has to do overtime. I turn on the lights in my apartment when I go out, so that when I come home the lights are always on. As far as I know, that was the only time he encountered the thing in the woods. It made me nervous for when I visit my hometown, though.
This happened when I was in my second year of college. 7 guys, including myself, went camping, and I want to share with you what happened. We had this friend in the group who came from the countryside. He said to us that he knew of some little-known place out in the mountains where we could all hang out during our summer vacation. He said that we would get to camp out by the mountain stream, so we piled into 2 cars and headed out to the place he recommended. We drove for 3 hours. Our countryside friend told us that once we got on the highway, it would only take about an hour, and even then, when we got off the roads, we would have to hike a mountain trail. It took about 30 minutes, but it felt like forever after that long drive. Some of those mountain roads were so narrow and overgrown that I was praying no one was coming in the opposite direction. One of the friends in my car remarked how overgrown it was, to which my countryside friend replied, "Yeah, no one knows about this place." It felt good, you know, like we were on an adventure. After a while, the mountain stream our friend promised came into view. It was amazing. It was surrounded by mountains and it felt like we owned it. I don't know if that sounds a little arrogant, but that's how I felt. There was even a waterfall, and it wasn't a small stream. Maybe I should call it a river. It was wide in parts. We were all alone. I mean that in the sense that we felt completely off the grid. I liked the idea until I noticed a building jutting out of the mountains on the west. It looked like a school. We settled in after pitching our tents and had some lunch. We played around in the river, and when the sun began to set, we lit a campfire and drank. However, the snacks and the booze ran out quicker than we had anticipated, so we split up. One team went on a booze recon mission, and the others minded our campsite. This happened at around 10 p.m. I didn't volunteer to go to the store. I was fine with just sitting around. We had no torches. We watched as our friends head off under the watchful light of the moon in one of the cars. We turned on the headlights of the other car so we could have some light. The stars were beautiful, and the night was filled with the chirp of the insects and the steady flow of the mountain stream. One of my pals broke the silence and said, "What's that?" I looked in the direction he was facing. He looked at the school, and I saw that there was some kind of light coming from over there. It looked to me like someone was walking around with a flashlight. We spoke among ourselves. Someone said that they thought that there were some people out there doing some urban exploration. Someone else said that they only saw one flashlight, so they doubted it. For the briefest of moments, it felt like the flashlight landed on us. We weren't far away enough to not be seen. Then the light went out. I figured that it was probably just a security guard or a janitor, but my countryside friends said that the school was closed. We were all in high spirits, but now our enthusiasm was drifting away. We all fell silent. It was already past midnight and our friends hadn't come back from the store yet, so two others from our group said that they would go and search for them in the other car. Without the headlights, we could only rely on the campfire for light. My friend and I were the only ones left at the campsite, and after a few moments he turned to me and asked, "Sorry, but can I go to sleep before you? I am so tired, man." He didn't wait for my reply. He just went into one of the tents nearby and settled down for the night. It sounded like he fell asleep almost instantly. I was alone. I watched the campfire. It was getting pretty creepy out there in the middle of nowhere. Our gang of 7, now down to just 1. Me. After a few minutes, I noticed something. I saw a light coming from the direction where we had entered in our cars. I didn't see headlights though. The light looked like it was about 100 meters away. I realized that it was coming from the woodland trail. It looked like it could be a flashlight. I started to get a little worried. I kicked dirt over the fire and then climbed into the closest tent. Unfortunately, it wasn't the one my friend went to sleep in. I put a sleeping bag around me. I had a bad feeling about whatever was approaching, but I kept my eyes on that light. I hoped that it wouldn't notice our campsite. I could see it move as if it was handheld. I started to wonder if it was the janitor or the urban explorer we saw earlier at the school. I wondered why the hell someone would be out here in the middle of the mountainous forest at this time of night. I piled up some bags around me to create a little barrier, and then I stayed as still as I possibly could. I was sure whoever was out there wouldn't approach a tent that was zipped up. Surely they'd realize that someone was asleep or camping. I was wrong. I heard footsteps approach the front of the tent, followed by a chilling sound of someone unzipping the tent door. Then an old raspy voice spoke.
"You're not here either."
I had goosebumps. I realized that it wasn't some janitor from the school. The voice belonged to an old woman. The old woman left my tent, then approached the tent that my friend was sleeping in. I didn't dare open my eyes, but I could hear her muttering something as she passed by. I knew that I wouldn't be able to catch a wink of sleep that night after this mysterious old woman decided to visit our tents. I lay there, with sweat amassing my brow, listening to the distant flow of the stream and the steady chirp of the night insects, praying for morning, praying for light. It was a long night, but when the first rays of morning light illuminated my tent, I got up and went to see if my friend was all right. Thankfully, there was no one out there. I looked in the tent and saw that he was sleeping. I decided not to wake him. Neither of my friend's cars came back that night. I started to get very worried for them, but after about 10 minutes, I saw them both return to our campsite. I asked them what happened, and they said that the first car got a puncture, and the second car which went to look for them got lost on the mountain roads. I told them all what happened last night, and no one believed me. We were set to camp out again that night, and they all thought I was just trying to scare them. I didn't want to stay there for another night, but I had no choice. I didn't drive out there. I got a ride, and it wasn't like I could just walk back home by myself. I reluctantly spent another night out there. It was an uneventful night, and the following morning we all piled into the cars and headed back home. I purposely sat next to my friend who went to sleep early that night the old lady came to our campsite. He hadn't mentioned anything about it, and I wanted to know if he slept through it, or if he didn't want to tell the others because they hadn't believed me. I said to him something like, "Did you hear what I said happened on the first night? I bet you're glad you went to sleep early, huh?" "I wasn't asleep," he replied. He said that, like me, he decided to stay as silent as possible. He said that the old woman actually went inside his tent, grabbed him, and shook him. He opened his eyes a little and saw that he wasn't dreaming, and terror gripped him. He saw the old woman looming over him and attempted to shake him awake. He was so scared, but he said that he couldn't do much else but pretend to be asleep. She was mumbling the whole time. He said he couldn't make out many words, but he said he will always remember one sentence. The old woman said,
"I don't know where my children have gone."
Many years have passed since that summer, but I wonder if she's still out there. Even though I don't know if her intentions were either good or bad, I somehow feel for the old lady. That poor woman sounded as if she had been out in the woods for a while. I always think about that night whenever summer rolls around.
This happened when I was about 10 years old. During summer vacation, I went to a nearby mountain to look for bugs. I say mountain, but it was more like a huge forest. Once you're in the forest and you're walking around, before you know it, you'll find yourself climbing the mountain. It was really cool. It felt like a miniature Mount Fuji to me at that age, and the forest felt like Aokigahara. There were 4 of us in total on the day that this happened. We woke up early in the morning and headed off into the woods. It rained overnight, and the air had moisture to it. I remember seeing mist layered thick around the mountain and the forest floor. I thought that we wouldn't find many bugs because it had rained and the ground was so wet. It was strange. We were able to find quite a few bugs, like stag beetles, and I saw sawtooth beetles too. We kept searching for bugs without realizing that we were going deeper and deeper into the forest. I found a rare bug, one I had never seen before. I'll try and describe it. It was about the size of a drone beetle. If you don't have that reference, I've added a photo on screen now. It was like one of those, only the pattern on its back was different. It also looked like it had hair growing on its back. The only type of drone beetles I had ever seen before were green ones. They had no patterns on their back, and they had no hair either. I haven't personally seen this bug again since. I was excited because I thought that I had found a really rare bug. My friends gathered around and they agreed with me. They hadn't seen it before either. Then we found another bug. It was a butterfly, or maybe a moth. It looked like an emperor moth, or a Japanese lunar one. Here's another photo. It was a similar shape and color, but like the drone beetle, it had a strange pattern on it. It was really big. I was so excited, and the tension was so high. I didn't want to let these rare bugs get away, so we had to be very careful when we were trying to get them in the nets, then into our containers. We went further and further into the forest, where the grass and the bush grew thicker and wilder there. Sure enough, we managed to get ourselves lost and separated from the trail. I started to feel tense. We tried to find our way back to the main paths, but we couldn't. I started to sweat. It was really weird. It was like I suddenly had a fever. I felt tears well in my eyes. I knew how bad it was to get lost in the woods. but then we stumbled across a small stream in a clearing. I don't know, but I think I saw some plants growing out there, maybe wasabi. Seeing this stream was brilliant because I remembered seeing several streams leading out of the forest at the bottom of the mountain. All we had to do was just follow the stream and then we would make it back home. I felt so relieved. So we started walking alongside the stream, and after a few moments, an old man seemingly appeared out of nowhere ahead of us. He must have been behind a tree or something. We were all in tears. We thought that we had found someone who could help us get out of the forest. I asked the old man, "If we follow this river, we can get back to town, right?" "Yeah, you're right there. What are you boys doing out here? You been looking for bugs?" He noticed our little collection cages and our nets. I said that we were bug hunting and that's how we managed to get ourselves lost. He stepped towards us and he grabbed my friend's insect cage. "You found some kind of rare or weird insects today, boys, right?" He asked and we just nodded. He was starting to scare me. He looked at the moth and the beetle with the strange patterns on their back, and he looked back at us with concern on his face. "You boys shouldn't be taking these bugs. You need to give them back to the mountain gods." We agreed. We didn't really have a choice. We had to release those bugs. There was a strange atmosphere between us. It was creepy and awkward. I broke the silence and I said, "I'm sorry, we'll go now." I turned to head off, and I felt his hand land on my shoulder. He gripped my shoulder and said, "If you go that way, you'll never make it out of the forest. You'll never see your home again. But if you go that way, you'll be out of here before you know it." He pointed towards some bushes. I thought that's the way we originally came from. We told him that was the direction we came in, and that's how we got lost. He ignored us. He kept pushing and pointing in that direction. "You'll be fine, just go on that way, hurry up." We reluctantly agreed with him. We went back the way we came. We just really wanted to get out of the woods. I guess we all had something to say. We wanted to talk about what the hell was going on, but we had to keep going before any discussions began. In less than 5 minutes, we had passed through the thick bushes, and we were back near the start of the trail. The fog had lifted and the sun was out. I was really upset that we had to release those rare bugs, but I gradually got used to the idea that we shouldn't have taken them in the first place. When I got home, I told my granddad about what had happened, and how I got lost on the mountain. He was really annoyed and angry at me. I had never seen him angry before. He was always kind and gentle. He loved his grandchildren. When I said that we were saved by some old man by the stream, he said, "Ha! That could have been the spirit of the mountains too, you know." He told me he had heard many stories from when he was my age about people entering the mountains when there was mist in the air. He spoke of stories where people encountered strange and unusual creatures, like my bugs. At that age, all I could think of was, oh, I was bewitched by something. But sometimes, I think about what happened in different ways. Was the old man a spirit? Was the streams and the bugs conjured up by some omnipresent force that lives out there in the mountains? I don't know. If it is all true, I'm just happy I didn't run into something bigger than bugs. I imagine some humanoid or some kind of hybrid bear thing would have been terrifying. I'm still friends with one of the guys I went bug hunting with that day. Back then, we called those things the mountain gods. I mention it from time to time. I never really got back into bug hunting after that day, but the experience stayed with me. I like to pretend that when I see a bug, I don't take notice of it and look for the same markings I saw that day as a kid. But I always do. I can't help myself. Fortunately, I haven't seen those rare bugs since that day.
Did you ever have a secret base or hideout as a kid? I think lots of kids used to build bases. I found mine in the mountains. It was an abandoned cabin. This experience takes place when I was in my 4th year of elementary school. I used to hang out with 2 kids from class, and it was when I was out with them that I discovered the cabin. We would always go out and play in the mountains. When we opened the door, we saw cobwebs everywhere. It felt as if we had just entered a dungeon or something from a video game. We quickly realized that in the past, someone must have lived there because there was furniture still there. Most of the furniture was busted up and unusable, but we were thrilled with our new discovery. It felt like it was ours, our new secret base. From that day onward, we spent most of our time after school at our new base. I took an old chair from my place up there, and we would bring comics and snacks. It was awesome. We wanted to keep the secret base just for ourselves. We decided that no one else from our school or outside of the school was allowed in, so we pulled our money together and bought a padlock and a latch. We installed it on the outside of the door and locked it whenever we left. We also installed a sliding bolt lock on the inside so we could keep people out when we were in there. Each day at class, we would decide who would be the first person to get there, and that person would become the key holder for the day. Whoever came to the hut after that would have to use a secret signal, a specific kind of knock to gain entrance. The secret knock was pretty simple. I still remember it, and it goes like this. 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock, pause, and the final 3 knocks. So one day, one of the 2 friends and I headed out to the secret base while we waited for our 3rd friend to come along. He was held up with some after-school activity that day. After a while, my friend and I in the cabin heard a knock at the door. We both thought that it was our friend. I raced over to the door to unlock it and let him in, but my other friend grabbed my arm and whispered, "That's not the secret knock." A voice on the other side of the door, which kind of sounded like our friend, then said, "Hey guys, it's me. Open the door." This was followed by 3 short knocks. It was really weird because it was our friend who was running late's idea to create a secret knock, and now he wasn't using it. I said to my other friend that it must be our friend out there, and that he has just forgotten the knock, but then he reminded me that we had all promised to never open the door until we heard the secret knock. We were bound by our oath to keep that door shut, and we took it very seriously. Another quick 3 knocks came at the cabin door. We stood there in silent defiance. More knocking followed. It wasn't the signal, so the door remained locked. The voice from behind the door, which sounded a little like my friend, began to get angry. "Open it!" it ordered in a stern voice. We stayed silent. "Why won't you open it for me?" the voice hissed. I don't know how many times I almost went over there and opened it. I was really wrestling with the idea in my head. Something deep down always persuaded me to keep my distance until I heard the correct secret knock. Something felt wrong. There was now a hammering at the door. The voice sounded less and less like my friend, and when it shouted in a booming voice its orders for us to open the door, it sounded nothing like him. We looked at one another in the dusty old cabin with eyes that pleaded for this to be over. Suddenly the knocking stopped, and there was nothing out there but the silence of the mountainous woods. My anxiety faded. We waited a few moments and then we unlocked the door and looked out there. There was no one there. We left our secret base and then headed to our friend's house. When we got there, we saw his mom in the garden and we asked where he was. She said that he was ill. She had to rush to school because he was running a very high fever, and by the time she got there, she was told he was already in an ambulance heading for the hospital. That made us feel really weird. On one hand, of course we were worried about our friend, but on the other, we realized it couldn't have possibly been him at the cabin door. After we left his house, we spoke about what happened at the cabin. We both considered ourselves very lucky that we didn't open the cabin door. My friend suggested that we probably shouldn't go back there again. I reluctantly agreed. We then went our separate ways and headed home. When I got home, the sun was still up and shining. My mom wasn't home from work yet. I dropped my school bag in the lounge and grabbed a drink from the refrigerator. I was feeling pretty tired. I laid on the sofa for a while and shut my eyes. I must have had my eyes closed for all of about 10 seconds when I heard a noise. There was a knock at the door. Our home has an intercom system. a little bit like the Ring doorbells that are popular these days. If someone pressed the doorbell, then you'd see who was out there on the little monitor inside the house. So I was wondering why someone hadn't pressed the bell, but I know that some people don't always press it. I got up and headed for the door, and then I stopped in my tracks. Something dawned on me. I recognized that knock. It went like this: 2 knocks, pause, 1 knock, pause, and a final 3 knocks. That was our secret knock. My head was spinning. I heard the same knock again. This was no coincidence. I could see through the frosted glass. Who or whatever was out there was bigger than my friends. There was a dark, hulking shadow looming in front of the door. I felt like whatever was trying to get into our secret base had followed me home. The banging at the door got louder and louder. I didn't know what to do. I called my friend, the one who was with me in the cabin, and after a few rings, he answered the phone. I said, "Hey, you won't believe this." And he said the following. What? He said, "What?" to the exact rhythm of the secret knock. I was in shocked silence, and then another voice spoke through the phone, and it said 3 chilling words. "Open the door." That's all I can remember. I woke up and I was lying on the sofa. I wondered if it was just a dream, but I saw the phone lying on the floor. It was a corded phone. I went over and picked it up. There was no dial tone, only silence. I quickly put it back in its cradle and backed away from it. The next day at school, my friend said that he had heard a knocking at the door, which sounded like our secret knock. I wonder if something from the mountains followed us. Maybe something happened in that cabin, and whatever it is still lives out there in the mountains. I heard stories of afflicted families being sent away to live in the mountains to prevent the spread of disease in the town.
When I was a child, I would often go on hikes and camping trips. My parents were a big fan of the wilderness, and they loved trips to the mountains. This happened on one of those trips. It was still morning when we reached the mountain, and the whole area was covered in a thick fog. I could barely see in front of my face. The mountain was dense with trees and bush. It was very intimidating at that age, and also alluring. That's how I got lost that morning. I didn't listen to my parents' advice and their instructions. I strayed from the path. It's a miracle that I'm even here today, and I want to tell you about that miracle. I don't know how many hours I was lost for, but I remember seeing the sun way above my head and thinking that I had missed lunch. I was very tired, hungry, and frightened. I had no idea where I was, and no matter which way I turned, I couldn't see anything but the fog and the trees. I sat down, and I was on the verge of tears. I was defeated and terrified. I noticed the presence of a person just beyond my left shoulder. They moved forward to be beside me. I expected it to be one of my parents, but it wasn't. It was someone that I had never seen before. A total stranger. They looked strange. They were dressed in animal furs, and they had a hat made out of straw. It was really weird. The strangest thing about this person was their height. They were very tall. I remember thinking that they were at least 2 foot taller than my dad. They must have been close to 8 foot tall. He spoke with an accent so thick I could barely make out a syllable. It was very unnerving. He repeated the words again and again until I caught the gist of what he was saying. "You lost?" All I could do was slowly nod my head in agreement. I stood up, and he started walking away. I followed as I thought that that's what he expected me to do. Honestly, it was like walking with a giant. This guy was an absolute monster. I know it might be easy to think that because I was young and everything seemed bigger back then, but honestly, that wasn't the case. We walked a few more moments, and I began to notice things that seemed familiar. I then heard voices, familiar voices. I could hear my parents shouting my name, searching for me. At this point, I ran to the direction of their voices, with tears welling in my eyes. I looked back towards the man who had led me to them, but he was already gone. I was alone again, but I knew that my parents were only a few more meters away, and they found me right away. I forgot about this experience until I went to the mountains again. I asked my parents about it a few years later, and it seems like my story differs from their understanding of the incident. They said that I literally stumbled out of a bush into their path, and once they had hugged me and we had composed ourselves, they asked me about where I had been. And that's when I said something odd apparently. I told them that the tall old man with one eye brought me back to them. I have no memory of telling them that. There's a good reason for that. I can't remember the face of the man who found me in those woods. It feels as if it's been deleted from my memories. I wonder if he really did have one eye. Or maybe he had something covering his eye. Who knows? I've been back to those mountains many times since then. As a kid and as an adult, sometimes I leave a little something out there, like an offering. Some liquor or food, just in case the guy who saved me comes across it. I know that seems dumb, but I never got to thank him, and with all the missing person cases that I read about, I think that I'm incredibly fortunate to be here today. I'll never forget being lost in the woods, but I hope one day I'll remember what that man's face looked like. It's the strangest thing.